The first time I was called a heshe was a traumatic moment for me. It was actually in grade 2. I was on the school bus, and all the older kids were at the very back. And I had, the rebellious kids make their way to the back too. And one of the older girls, I think she was in grade 5 at that time, I was in grade 2, she called me a heshe, simply because I exhibited feminine characteristics. And that heshe, that phrase, sort of followed me around and kind of haunted me my entire life, because as I was growing up gay in a very conservative South Asian family, there was different dialects of it said to me as I was growing up by my mom, my dad, my cousins. And I never really understood it, but I knew it meant that I was masculine and I was feminine at the same time. But I didn't understand how that fit into my social construct at that time. And it was traumatizing because I knew it wasn't accepted and that it was looked down on. And so it made me sad.
When you're thinking back to, Daniel in grade 2, what was that moment like? Like, what did it feel like inside? Can you describe that?
I think I felt rejected. I felt sad and rejected that I didn't fit into what, I'm speaking in such intelligent terms right now, what society would consider the norm. I was different, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know why I was that way. I didn't know how I became that way, but I knew that it wasn't good. And that was made very clear by my parents. My mom was the youngest of 14 kids, so I grew up in a very, very big family. And I think all the male cousins who were older at that time also told me that it wasn't good to be like a girl, to be like a woman.
Did you, after that day on the school bus, did you change the way you behaved? Did you try to alter who you were?
As I would approach the school grounds, I would talk less. I had a higher voice. And I knew that's the reason why they were saying a lot of those things. And, I'm sure I had a bit of a feminine strut. Actually, there was a lot of girls in school who would chant this song called The Woman Walk as I would walk down the road. It's funny when I think about it, but at that time, I would keep very straight. I wouldn't try to show off too much character as I was walking. I tried not to talk to anybody because I didn't want to be noticed for the things that made me feminine. So I think I became very closed off. I went into a shell and I wasn't so social. I loved to talk, but I didn't talk at the same time because I was too afraid of what people would say when I did.
That really had a lasting impact to you.
It did. I'm that way till this day. I mean, as a media personality, I still have a lot of stage fright because it's affected me. I have some nerves even just sitting here talking to you about it because what are people going to think? Even though deep down inside, I don't really care what people will think, my body has learned to react in a way that I can't control anymore. And I think that's what those experiences have done. It's made me very I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in social settings, yeah.
Still,
yeah. And I think I'm unlearning it, and I think perhaps, being in front of the camera, sitting here talking to you and doing the various other things I do is just a way for me to continue to challenge myself to feel more comfortable in what it is that I'm doing at that time. So I think I'm being challenged in healthy ways, but it's had a very lasting impact, and I don't think it's gonna go away.
Right.
Yeah.
We started this because I was telling somebody how I remember being called a Paki, and I remember exactly how it felt. Like, it gives me a visceral feeling even just thinking back to it. Do you get that from that moment? Can you still feel it almost?
Not really. I don't. Only because I've been so empowered by that term. I've really made an effort to celebrate myself. I'm proud to sit here in a beautiful bright blazer. I wear pink. I was told I couldn't wear pink because it was a girl's color. So I always celebrate these parts of myself, and I don't allow it to have that negative effect on me. But at the same time, I do struggle with certain things like stage fright, but I don't try to focus on it. But when I sit down and I think about those terms, it doesn't have that negative impact on me. But when I sit back and I think about the young Daniel, I do feel very sorry for him because I do think he could have been able to flourish a lot sooner, perhaps found his way in life a lot sooner too, had he not felt the way he did then.
Are you mad at this grade 5 student?
I did grow up very angry. I was a very angry kid, and I think my anger was shown toward my family. I was very hostile. I held a lot of negative emotions for a very, very long time. And I actually dealt with that by eating, just kind of self-medicating with food. And then I sought some counseling while I was in high school because I knew it all led to this bigger question, which was my sexuality, which was a part of who I was, which was now going to lead to this gigantic celebration, and I could feel it. But I had a lot of things to address. And I had to let go of a lot of that anger, and I had to do a lot of forgiveness. And I think since then it's wonderful. I'm actually grateful for those experiences. But I always sit back and I think about my younger self, and I do feel very bad for that younger Daniel because I think there's a lot that could have been avoided had he been able to deal with those situations then. Had his family been a little bit more educated about homosexuality, they would have been able to answer certain questions he may have had. They could have, I think, guided his journey a little more. But you know, you get through it, and I'm still here.
What was it like when you finally did accept yourself and you came out? What was that like?
So it was in 2010, March of 2010. And you know, there was a lot of, I was so tired of being a bitter, miserable person, you know. And you know, I loved Shania Twain, and I wanted to, you know, just go off the rooftops and just talk about my love for Shania Twain, or I wanted to wear that pink blazer, and I was so tired of being confined. And I think the conservative South Asian family I was growing up in confined me in many other ways at the same time. So I did feel like I was in somewhat of a jail. Like I couldn't be myself. I had to be what my family thought was acceptable. And that was being a straight man at the same time too. I thought my narrative would be to marry a woman, have kids, you know, have my family live with me, get the job that they wanted, I'd be a doctor or a lawyer, and everything would be great. And it just wasn't working out that way. And in my adolescence, I was faced with a lot of questions when it came to relationships at school. You know, I had a crush on a girl at one time too, and then I remember not kind of feeling that way. And I felt that perhaps I had a crush on her because everybody else was having a crush on a girl at the same time too. And so I was faced with all these questions constantly, and it all led me back to my sexuality. But I think I just kind of suppressed it under my subconsciousness, and I wouldn't, you know, when you don't acknowledge something, you don't see it. You don't act it, you don't believe it, and it's not a reality. And that's what I did. And I think a part of me had just kind of been crushed in that process. But when I finally came out, it was a celebration, and I had a don't give a damn type of personality about it too. It didn't matter to me what my mom thought or what my dad thought. This was who I was, and that's exactly how I've been since.
That moment being called he, she, how did that impact you? You've made a whole project out of it.
That was actually before the Orlando shootings. And after the shootings had happened, I decided not to release a project altogether because I became fearful. Now, oh my God, if I put this project out, you know, kind of exploring the idea of what it meant to be masculine and feminine at the same time, I would face the same type of discrimination I did back then. But I realized that by putting it out there and kind of owning that statement was empowering. And so I decided to put it out there so that others could experience it. And perhaps if there was somebody else who understood that struggle, their journey would become a little easier. And so I am quite disconnected to that project. At the same time, I did it to explore and make a statement, but it's a part of me that was in the past, and I'm kind of living in the future right now. But I do want, and I put it out because I knew that there were people out there in the South Asian community, a lot of men, who didn't feel confident in being who they were. And so I felt that if I put it out there, then they could identify with something and know that they weren't alone in that journey.
So then I'll ask you, I mean, that term he, she, you being called he, she in grade 2, how did that impact the rest of your life? That moment.
I think it was the first time that I knew I was different. And throughout my childhood, throughout my adolescence, and throughout a lot of my early adulthood, it reminded me that I was different in a negative way. And I think now I celebrate it, but it takes a lot of work to be in that place of celebration. I still know that being a he, she, and I say I'm a he, she because I do embody that phrase 100%. Being masculine and being feminine, not being afraid to, you know, as my mom would say, have my hands up in the air like this, you know, not being afraid to wear that outfit that I want to wear, not being afraid to be gay. To be a gay in 2017, I'm not afraid of it. And I think by celebrating that, I can acknowledge the pain of that statement in my childhood and in my adolescence. But I do think it's difficult at the same time because I know I'm not fulfilling my parents' expectations 100%. And you know, even they called me a he, she at points throughout life too, because they didn't understand what it was to be gay. They didn't know how to describe someone who was gay. And I think as much as I celebrate that statement today, it still kind of haunts me in negative ways, but I choose not to let that negativity consume me. I celebrate it instead. And that's the way I'm dealing with it. I suppose it's kind of the way I'm healing.